My name is Lynda Ater. I'm a member of Blackfish Gallery, and this is September 2013. This is my current show at the gallery. It's rather an installation rather than individual paintings, although it's composed of individual paintings. Color relationships and color interaction are what I am interested in. So this particular body of work is more minimalist than previous works and focuses on the primacy of color, although the surface of these pieces have shapes in them, but they're sort of subservient to the actual colors themselves. I've used these shapes that you'll see within each square in the past. I worked as a clinical laboratory scientist for years looking at cell shapes under the microscope. These are abstracted cell shapes. I like their form, and of course they're really seared into my brain now. I use them frequently. This time it's a more subtler display of those shapes. In this project, I wanted, conceptually, I wanted the actual process itself in making these to define the finished work. So first I established a few parameters. The first one was that I would use 6-inch squares. I had 12-inch squares later on, but first 6-inch squares. These are birch panels. And then next, the square surface would contain collaged paper shapes. I cut these shapes out of a white, fairly thick paper, and then glued them to the surface, and then painted them with a single color. And the third then would be that each square would be painted a single color. When each square was completed, I hung it on my studio wall, and after a few dozen were displayed, I began to arrange them in various ways. I came up with large squares, each composed of all the smaller ones. Then I used the smaller ones to compose a large rectangle, and then I decided to just look at them as randomly displayed on the wall. And then I came up with cross shapes using 5 squares, X shapes, each hung on the corner. V shapes, also composed of 3 squares that each hung on the corner. And then I came up with these zigzag shapes, which were composed of all these V shapes. And I liked that. I liked how that zigzag interacted with the wall. There seemed to be much more movement associated with that. And the idea for me with color is the movement of the colors and how they work with each other, against each other, and against the surface they're on. So I settled on these zigzag lines arranged horizontally, which immediately reminded me of Rickrack. And Rickrack's a trim that's used to adorn clothes, particularly women's and children's. As a child, I sewed clothes for my dolls using lots of colored Rickrack. And as an adult, I sewed my young daughter's clothes using Rickrack as a trim. Then the title of this show is a nod to women's crafts, particularly sewing, the piecing together of parts to make a larger whole, which is what I've done here. This is an actual piece of canvas that has Rickrack, the kind that's used in sewing that I described earlier, in several rows. So this is what the pieces reminded me of. Not many of you will probably know what Rickrack is, especially men who maybe haven't sewed, but this is something that was used quite a bit for children's and women's clothes in the past. This is a larger piece. The squares are 12 inches. I decided I wanted something to have a larger visual impact on this particular wall, so I made some that were 12-inch squares. This one I put together in sort of a deliberate way, similar to what I did before on the other smaller squares, but in this case I've got 3 colors down here that are on the kind of darker side, but also a little less intense than at least these 2 up here. Intensity refers to brightness, so you'll see that this is much brighter than this, also lighter, but it's probably the same brightness as this, even though they're different colors. These are complementary colors, so all the greens would kind of move in that direction. I liked having just that extra orange out there as a separate piece, a separate color, and more intense than at least these on the bottom and on the ends. This one's called Rickrack, 3.